both immediate and irreparable. This pandemic has cruelly reminded us of our frailty, our lack of preparation in the faces of such a crisis on such a scale. The declaration on the occasion of the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations underscored the fact that our world is still a long way away from the goals set out by the founders of this great organization. The United Nations was built on the ruins of the most murderous conflict in history, sending out a message of peace to take up universal challenges, and for this to establish an institutional framework. It accomplished great progress in areas as transcendental as human rights, the eradication of poverty, the building of democratic institutions, the fight against climate change, sustainable development, and the protection of the most vulnerable during armed conflict. Unfortunately, the path lying ahead is still a long one. This year, the rich countries once again have insisted on their privileged position. We quickly had access to vaccines and hoarded millions of doses, which has deepened inequality. The world again sees entire families fleeing their countries of origin, looking for a better future. Humanitarian crises are getting worse. The planet is sounding the alarm bell because the point of non-return when it comes to the climate change will soon be achieved. Or we see the rights of women receding precipitously. Mr. President, allow me to congratulate you on the relevance of the subject of this 76th General Assembly, the presidency of hope. Hope. Indeed, not all is lost. We must pursue our efforts to plan and propose a response which will make it possible to relaunch the countries that have been most ravaged by the pandemic. A response focused on more sustainable and inclusive development which leaves no one behind, so that everyone is able to live their lives in dignity and on equal terms. We call upon you for cooperation and mobilization of multilateral efforts, and that in respect of the founding values of the United Nations and in a spirit of inclusion. On the 20th and 21st of April last, Andorra hosted the 27th Ibero-American Summit of Heads of State and Government. The topic was Innovation in the Service of Sustainable Development, the 2030 Agenda. And my country, a country of 78,000 inhabitants, addressed a community of 670 million people. We had the possibility to assert the essential role of multilateralism, particularly in the face of challenges such as coronavirus and climate change, because no country, no state, however powerful it may be, can address a challenge of this magnitude without the participation of the rest of the international community. Throughout previous months, we've seen that the hope of arresting the spread of COVID-19 lies with vaccination. Vaccines are the most powerful tool that we have to fight this pandemic, but it will remain without effect unless all of the global population has access to them. That's why cooperation which exists between public institutions, the private sector, universities and research centres must also be applied to the distribution of vaccines. That's what I requested on the 21st of April. It's not acceptable that there is still such a difference in the level of vaccination between developed countries and developing countries. The World Health Organization has warned us that this attitude will lead to a catastrophic moral failure, and the pandemic will continue to thrive if we only partially apply the solution. We still have time to act. We must encourage better systems such as the COVAX system that Andorra contributes to, which can guarantee timely access, universal access to vaccines. The climate urgency is another great challenge that we have to look at from an inclusive point of view. A return to the past is not possible. It's too late to rectify errors in the area of the environment, but it's not too late to stop committing more mistakes. The next decade will be fundamental for the future of our planet. COP26 next November in Glasgow will be the last opportunity for the most powerful economies to make a reality of their commitments to achieve carbon neutrality. Andorra welcomes the two meetings, high-level meetings, that will be held as part of the 76th Assembly of the United Nations. The Food Systems Summit, and Andorra will be participating in that, comes at a very good time. Production, distribution, and agricultural income, as well as patterns of consumption, have great consequences on human beings and their environment. Reconciliation with nature, with the planet, is possible if we adopt an approach that combines healthy food, traditional knowledge and science in order to innovate and conserve the only resource that we have and which we must learn to share sustainably, namely the planet. Andorra joined the global call to make SDG 2, eliminating hunger, an imminent reality. According to the report on food insecurity of the FAO and other agencies, hunger in the world and child obesity are increasing. These trends, at first sight total opposites, should make us think about the urgent need to reform our systems of food production and consumption in order to arrive at models and patterns of consumption that are more sustainable and more healthy. It is in this role that I welcome the contribution of FAO and the World Food Programme to achieve this SDG as soon as possible. Excellencies, we are faced with the task of building back in several areas: health, the economy, the environment, and immigration. Our models of working, mobility, and consumption themselves have been called into question. The issue remains whether it is desirable to go back to the old normal or not. Let's seize the opportunities offered by this great organization, namely the United Nations, to resolve this issue so that multilateralism becomes the path to follow and finds solutions for all of our citizens. The United Nations has a framework which makes it possible to move forward to detect and diagnose imbalances, injustices, and those most vulnerable, and to define solutions that states can apply. We should insist on the pillar of human rights, which must guide us in all of our actions. Andorra will provide, therefore, its support to the Secretary-General's proposal to convene a summit of the future. The preservation of peace and security is the raison d'être of this organization. It is one of its founding pillars, but I see, and with concern, that there is a worsening of humanitarian crises, particularly an increase in poverty, the onset of natural disasters, which are ever more frequent and devastating, and a reduction of international aid. Certain particular cases have been going on for years. The United Nations has mechanisms such as peacekeeping operations to alleviate these situations, but prevention, which is multi-dimensional, must be the main goal of our action, as well as the protection of the most vulnerable, as well as inclusion and equality. We've entered now into the 76th session. In the declaration adopted during the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, we reaffirmed our trust in this organization and in multilateralism. We know that we must act together and proactively, and that we must take up new challenges such as digital cooperation in order to leave no one behind, or integrate young people who are vectors of change. Ladies and gentlemen, let us be under no illusion. The future of generations that are better prepared is in our hands. Their experience and their maturity will depend in large part on the consequences of our action or lack of action. We cannot disappoint them once again. Education is a human right which, since the adoption of 2030 Agenda, has been recognized as SDG 4 and one of the main catalyzers of sustainable development, eradication of poverty, and conflict prevention. Thanks to people power and communities and quality education, SDG 4 constitutes the best way to change societies and to protect the planet. When we invest in education, the education of girls and women, they participate in all aspects of life, and their actions are inclusive, and then we have the conditions to create change, economic and social progress that benefits everyone. Equality, and in particular gender equality, requires the active participation of women, not only so that they have access to decision-making, but also so that their voice is taken into consideration and listened to carefully, whatever their situation or their condition. We have to define new relationships in order to put an end to patriarchal systems, which are a real hindrance for half of the population. The empowerment of women, which has speeded up, cannot stop. It cannot recede because of the pandemic. I would like to salute the work of UN Women and here congratulate its new Director General, Ambassador Sima Bajos. Andorra, for its part, will maintain our firm commitment in recent years to promote policies relating to gender equality. This can be seen in our legislation, which has designed a pioneering and ambitious system, the aim of which is to promote this equality and the fight against discrimination. Mr. President, Andorra has been part of the international community since 1993. We are a country that is with a small population, but Andorra has never used this as an excuse to refuse to respond to face our responsibilities, be they national or international challenges. In 2013, the highest representative of the United Nations came to Andorra for the 20th anniversary of our joining of the United Nations. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon at the time, stressed, and I quote, "the dignity of the Andorran people, our pride in our history, our singular nature, and our solidarity." He asked Andorrans to go even further. We heard that call, and we have committed ourselves along this path. We are part of this community, and we must all assume the same responsibility. It's in this spirit that we are addressing, in a mountain environment, the climate crisis. Last August, all of the media reported on the conclusions of the most recent report of the Intergovernmental Group of Experts on Climate Change of the United Nations, which warned of serious consequences of climate change and of global warming. As I indicated previously, the countdown has begun. In the area of mitigation and adaptation to climate change, Andorra accepted the commitments of the Paris Agreement and is banking on the production of renewable energy and carbon pricing to reduce its carbon emissions and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. We have a crucial project for biodiversity through our national strategy, and we want